بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمد يوافي ويكافئ مزيدا نويت تعلم تعليم وتذكر تذكير ونفع الجفاء الفاتح الاستفادة الحث ولا كمسك بكتاب الله تعالى وسنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ودعاء الهدى ودلالة الخير وابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. All praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Peace and blessings be upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Inshallah, to continue on the fiqh that we've been covering, inshallah, I think we will have a short revision of the ritual ablution, the wudu, and inshallah we'll take it from there. I'm just going to present my screen. Inshallah. So ritual ablution. So we talked about the word wudu linguistically derives from wadu'a, which is to be pure, clean. When is wudu needed? Wudu is needed. It's obligatory for prayer, one, and the touching of the Quran, and including translations according to the majority opinion. Ablution is also necessary for circumambulation. Does anybody know what we mean by circumambulation here? Yes, correct, excellent. So it's about the going around the Kaaba, doing the tawaf. So circumambulation is a tawaf here, and the touching Quranic commentaries also. So that the tafsir of the Quran would also require having wudu. So the difference here is that it's necessary. It's not an obligation, but it's still required to do so. But the first, we cannot pray at all without having ablution, and we can't touch the Quran. So that's the point there. Okay. So the conditions. So the conditions of wudu is firstly that it needs to cover all the skin with purifying water. Thus, even if the small size of a pinhead remains dry upon any part of that body part, it's obligatory to be washed. The ablution is not valid. And we talked about categories of people perhaps that would be excused, like a painter, for example, where paint remains on their hand. It is difficult to remove every single speck of paint. But generally speaking, if we're washing body parts, then we need to make sure there's no barrier between anything and the skin, and that water is actually coming over the skin of every part of that body part that we're washing. The cessation of ritual impurity whilst performing ablution, so meaning that if we're in a state of wudu and we have something happen to us that invalidates wudu, we're therefore no longer in the state of wudu. And thirdly, removal of anything that prevents water reaching the limbs of ablution, we've talked about, includes nail varnish for a woman, but not henna or ink. So ink is not a cause of a barrier, but nail varnish, paint, etc. would all be classed as barriers. Obligatory components of wudu, firstly, is a washing of the face, and we talked about what the face actually entails, from the top of the forehead to the chin, and from the earlobe to the earlobe. Washing the hands and the forearms up to and including the elbows. So it's not up to the elbows, it's including the elbow limb. So including the limb of the elbow. Wiping a quarter of the head. So a quarter of the head must be wiped with water. And washing the feet up to and including the ankles. Not up to the ankles, but including the ankle bone there. So water has to cover all of those parts for the wudu to be valid. So this is the obligatory components. And then we mentioned the ayah of the Quran, which actually talks specifically about these parts, about washing your faces, your hands up to your elbows, and wipe your heads and wash your feet up to the ankles. So this is where the obligation of the wudu is. The sunnah elements of that which is covered within the sunnah, which is to have a better wudu and we've said before, we shouldn't just be looking at having an obligatory wudu. The intention and the aim should be to follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in having the sunnah wudu. But the difference here is that we understand what is an obligation, such that there may be times that we don't have the time to do a complete sunnah wudu, so we can do a wudu according to the obligatory elements, and therefore ensure that our wudu's, there. We may be missing the prayer time, and we only have a couple of minutes left, in which case you would do the fard wudu, and you would leave out all the sunnahs because you haven't got time to do them. So the sunnah components, firstly, it's washing the hands up to the wrists 3 times before inserting them into a container of water. Now, we should still be washing our hands, but obviously we're not probably using the container of water. We'll be having water come out the tap. Mentioning the name of Allah at its beginning, not doing so whilst in the bathroom, because whilst doing so in the bathroom, it wouldn't be permitted to mention the name of Allah. But if we're washing ourselves in a sink in the kitchen or somewhere not in the bathroom, then it's fine to mention the name of Allah at the beginning. Using a toothstick, a siwak, is from the sunnah. So we use a siwak, rinsing the mouth 3 times, rinsing the nose 3 times, wiping the entire head once. Okay. The obligatory component was what? How much of the head do we need to have wiped for the obligatory of the wudu?
Quarter.
A quarter, excellent. Wiping the entire head and ears with the same water. So this is from the sunnah that we don't take new water to wipe the head and to wipe the ears. So we take water for the head, but we don't take new water for the ears. We use the same. This is what the Prophet ﷺ did. Saturating the beard, the fingers and the toes, making sure that water is within all of these parts. Washing each limb 3 times. The obligatory is to wash each limb once, not 3 times. The sunnah is to do it 3 times. Having an intention is sunnah for the Hanafi. So to intend that we're doing wudu. But if we didn't intend and somebody chucked us in a pool of water, and by us falling into that pool of water, all of those limbs actually became wet, then our wudu we still have wudu, even though we didn't intend it. But to intend it is from the sunnah. Continuity, i.e. washing the limb before the previous limb is dried, is from the sunnah. Recommended components, to face the Qibla. So if we're able to face the Qibla when we're doing wudu, then this is a recommended practice. But if we're not able to and our sinks are not facing the Qibla, then this is not an issue. Sitting at an elevated place. This is why we see in most of the masajid that you have a seat raised up when you're doing your wudu. So this is recommended practice. Maintaining the order, beginning with the right side, wiping the nape, which is the back of the neck, and extending the brightness. And we talked about the fact that wudu has a reality to it, in that it will bring brightness to us. And from a spiritual perspective, because the Prophet ﷺ was asked, how will you recognize your ummah? He said, I will recognize the ummah through the brightness of their faces, from the wudu that they've made. So, and the brightness of wherever their water has reached through their wudu, this part would be shining on the Day of Judgment. So when we think about that, then this is going to have something that's beyond just what we're doing in terms of preparing ourselves for prayer. It's something which is where the Prophet ﷺ is able to identify us. So we talked about mentioning the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, avoiding conversation. So not engaging in the middle of doing wudu, because the wudu itself is an act of worship, and we don't want to be entering into conversation during our wudu, because we're breaking out from that act of worship. Although wudu still remains valid, it's still fine, but it's better that we don't enter conversation. Drinking what remains of the water. This was a practice of the companions with the Prophet ﷺ. They would drink the remains of the water. Prophet ﷺ would drink the remains of the water. This may not be may be so easy to do in the situation that we're doing our wudu. Performing 2 units of prayer to completion. So this is the Tahiyyat al-Wudu. After doing wudu, you make 2 rak'ahs of Tahiyyat al-Wudu. This is from a recommended practice. But if we said before, we can combine our intention, that if we make the wudu and then we're going to make the prayer, we're making the sunnah prayer, for example, we combine the Tahiyyat al-Wudu intention with the sunnah, and inshallah we'll receive the reward. So you can have multiple intentions within acts, and then reciting the prophetic supplications. Although there's no specific supplications for the wudu, but there are supplications which can be recited, that the Prophet ﷺ recited, through his way, and we can take them for the wudu. And for example, after the wudu, the Prophet ﷺ would make the dua, Allahumma salaka, ashhadu la ilaha illallah, astaghfirullah, salaka al-jannata, أشهد لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم اجعلني من التوابين واجعلني من الطاهرين واجعلني من عبادك الصالحين. That there is no God but Allah. I testify that there is no God but Allah. Oh Allah, open the doors of Jannah. Open the doors of Jannah and make me from amongst the pious, and وَجَعَلْنِي مِنَ التَّوَّابِينَ, make me of those that repent to you. وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمُطَهِّرِينَ, make me of those people that purify themselves, and make me of those people who are pious. So this was a dua that the Prophet ﷺ recited after doing wudu, and he says the one who recites this dua, the doors of Jannah will be open for them. Yeah, the doors of Jannah will be open for that person. So inshallah we hope to be amongst this category. So what's disliked is excessive use of water, because wasting water is disliked. So water is an amana that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. So to waste this water is a disliked practice. To be duly stringent in the use of water is also disliked, that we're being miserly with water, that we're not able to wash the limb properly with the water, and seeking assistance for no good reason. Okay, and then invalidators of wudu. So any liquid or solid exiting either of the private parts would invalidate wudu. Gas from the rear. Okay, so letting go invalidates wudu. Birth. So when a woman gives birth, this invalidates wudu, and any other flowing liquid from any other part of the body would invalidate wudu. Mouthful of vomit invalidates wudu. Okay, if it's less than a mouthful, then it doesn't, but a mouthful of vomit does. Spittle containing equal amount or more of blood, okay, would invalidate the wudu. And in fact, in terms specifically about blood coming out, but blood coming out, and it's flowing past out of its exit point, then this would invalidate wudu. But if we see blood just appear on the top and it's not flowing, then this wouldn't invalidate wudu. Sleep will invalidate wudu. The loss of intellect, laughing out loud during prayer, that's a serious thing. But this doesn't include the janazah prayer. I'm not sure why anybody would be laughing out loud during the janazah prayer, but if you did, then this would not break that prayer. But for all of the prayers, it would break your prayer, and it would also break your wudu. And then having sexual contact would break your wudu. And this is specifically in terms of the private parts. Touching would break the wudu. Then we move on to menstruation. So this is haid. This is a liquid by which a female becomes an adult. I'm just going to run through haid quite quickly. It's not something that I'm really wanting to take any questions on specifically. And I think if there are any specific questions relating to haid, then inshallah, I normally defer all questions to my wife, and she goes through cases and helps sisters with their haid. So inshallah, this if anybody does, then inshallah we can refer them to my wife for taking any of those questions, inshallah. So this is a fluid by which a female becomes an adult. It emerges from the womb of a woman. The menstruation period lasts from puberty to menopause and is considered the fertile phase of a woman's life. Haid from the perspective of the religion is not deemed as being, a woman is a less of a woman, or a woman is treated like she's impure. This is actually a very incorrect view, and the Judaic traditions treat women like that. So when there is a state of menstruation, they can't touch certain things, and Islam's completely different, and it's just the fact that she's going through this period, in which case she's excused from doing certain things. Her obligations are lifted from her to make ease in the situation that she's there. So it's a rahmah for the woman. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when say that Aisha, his wife, was in the state of haid, he would put his head on her lap, meaning that this is a time where it's forbidden to have any close relations, but to show that actually there's nothing wrong with a woman in this state. And it's not from the religion, it's maybe from cultural practices, and that a woman gets treated in a certain way because she's in the state of haid, but that's not correct in terms of from a religious sense. So what's the minimum age? The earliest possible age for the start of menstruation is 9 lunar years. So 9 lunar years for a woman, and the lunar year is 354 days, 11 days shorter than the solar year. Therefore, 9 lunar years are equal to 8 years, 8 months, and 3 weeks of the solar year. So it's really that period, at that point, that she can start having her menstruation. What's a condition? A girl becomes an adult upon bleeding, not due to sickness, and minimum age. And the minimum menstrual period is 3 days and nights, 72 hours. Anything less than this is considered irregular bleeding. Okay, so what we class as the menstruation period is anything which is post 3 days and nights, which is 72 hours. The maximum menstruation period is 10 days, which is 240 hours. So so anything between 72 and 240 hours is classed as a menstrual period. And anything that extends beyond the habit and 10 days is considered irregular bleeding. Okay? Anything that extends beyond the habit. So the habit here is what the normal practice of that woman is. And 10 days is considered irregular bleeding. So anything post that would be considered irregular bleeding. Colours, any colour seen during the time of menstruation are considered menstruation until the fluid clears, i.e. until the different coloured liquids that come out come to a point of clearness. Red blood is not a requirement, as sometimes the colour varies, sometimes yellow, sometimes other colours, due to the presence of cervical mucus. The habit, so talking about the habit is the last menstrual cycle and purity period. So every woman's habit is different. Some may have a small number of days as their habit, others have a longer number of days. So a woman would have a habit, and therefore she knows how to work things out because of this habit. A woman must always record their habit, both the bleeding and the clean period, the time of menstruation, the time of haid, and the time of tuhur, the time of purity. So both should be known. A woman who does not do this is known as al-mahayyara, which means helpless and embarrassed and confused, because she doesn't know what the difference between her being in this state and not being in this state. And why is this important? Because it depends on your worship. If you think that you're in the state of menstruation and you're not in the state of menstruation, then you're missing your prayers, and quite possibly you're missing fasts which you should be fasting. And then if you're in the state, if you think that you're in the state of menstruation and you're not in the state of menstruation, you could be sorry, if you're not in the state of menstruation, and you're yeah, so if you're doing, if you're fasting and you're praying, and you think that you're in the state, not in the state of menstruation, you are, then you've basically invalidated those, and you've been forbidden to pray, and you've been forbidden to fast in the state of menstruation. So it's quite important because it affects worship. And therefore, knowing those points and those timings are very important, so you know exactly what the boundaries are and when you are in the state and when you're not in the state. So what's the prohibitions in the state of menstruation? Praying, firstly. Secondly, touching the Quran. You cannot touch the Quran. You cannot enter the mosque. So this is a very big problem, actually, because in a lot of masajid in the UK, they're not, it makes things very, very difficult for women. Masajid should have a room, an area which is not classed as the masjid, meaning the intention of that place was never the masjid. Because if they don't have a place in the masjid where they haven't made the intention of this place which is not masjid, then women can't go into this place if they're in a state of menstruation. This becomes problematic because when there's programs and stuff that they're not able to take part. So this is important. So a masjid is built. A masjid is a masjid upon intention. So okay, we're not talking about the building of. You've got the building of the masjid. Not everything in that building is going to be masjid. For example, the area of wudu, the area of the toilets are not going to be classed as a masjid. The masjid place is generally classed as a place of where prayer takes place. And even you may have a place where prayer is taking place, but you're not classing it as masjid. So it's about the intentions of the people when acquiring the masjid. What did they draw out as being the place of masjid? Is it just the prayer hall and everything else is excluded? Or is it the prayer hall? Is it the corridor at the back? Is it the room at the back? Everything. Is it the women's area? Is everything masjid? So this is quite important for the masajid to consider. Reading the Quran is also a prohibition as well. The exceptions here is where a woman is a Quran teacher. She can listen to the Quran. She can't touch the Quran, but she could use something to maybe turn the pages of the Quran if she's listening to someone, but definitely cannot touch the Quran. Circumambulation, which is to do the tawaf around the Kaaba, is prohibited in the state. Quite obviously, because you can't enter the mosque. So now you're entering the sacred sanctuary of the Kaaba. You can't enter the sacred sanctuary of the Kaaba. Fasting and having this of having intercourse is prohibited in the state of menstruation. It's a severe sin to have this in the state of menstruation. So prayer, it is recommended for the menstruating woman to perform ablution with the intention of drawing near to Allah and make dhikr in her normal place of prayer for the length of time she would do to take her prayer. Why is this? It's just to connect her to remember the remembrance of Allah. She can still perform wudu and she can make a dhikr, because the dhikr here is to mentioning Allah's name, making remembrance, but she's not making recitation of the Quran. Okay. Ibn Abadin has narrated that if she does this, the reward of her best prayer ever will be written for her if she does this practice. Ibn Abadin, the great Hanafi jurist. So this is not a obligation upon her. She doesn't have to do that. It's just a recommended practice. So she keeps connected, but she doesn't have the obligation upon her. Allah has removed that obligation because of the pain and the difficulty she's experiencing. He's been merciful to her and removed this from her. touching the Quran. So if Quranic verses are included in any book, it is permissible to touch the book and the pages, but not the actual verses of the Quran. It is unlawful to touch a sheet of paper that has nothing but a Quranic verse on it. Why? Is because this is now predominated as like the Quran, because it contains Quranic verses. A translation and or commentary has the same ruling as the Quran, and we've covered this in the section of wudu. It is disliked to touch books of supplications and remembrances. Reading the Quran, the prohibition applies to reading aloud or moving one's lips. Okay. However, if reading with one's eyes or reciting in one's heart, it is permissible to do that. So what we're talking about here, reading the Quran, is the qira'ah of the Quran, to recite, and to move your lips and read. But if you're looking at the Quran, then this wouldn't, or reciting in your heart, this wouldn't be an issue. Reciting Quranic verses with the intention of supplication or praise is permissible, because it's not like dhikr. You know, if people have certain litanies that they do, then that's fine to do, because these are du'as, but not recitation of the Quran. So it takes the ruling of dhikr as opposed to qira'ah, reciting the Quran. So purity, the tuhur, is the minimum period of purity is 15 days, which is 360 hours. There is no maximum period. So there's a minimum period between one menstrual cycle and the other menstrual cycle. A woman who does not bleed for years does not assume menstruation. If no menstrual blood is seen, a woman has not menstruated. Okay, so the condition is that blood is to be seen in order for her to be seen as being in that state of haid, state of menstruation. If a woman does not bleed during a period when she normally would have as a result of medicine she is consuming, she is not considered to be menstruating. And this is sometimes used for perhaps women that are going on Hajj, for example, and they do not want to be in a situation that they're going to have difficulty while getting there and entering into a state of menstruation, so they may take some medicine to delay the menstrual cycle, and therefore, you know, if their habit is normally entering in that time, they've now kind of delayed that, so they're no longer in that state. So prior to the habit, if bleeding stops prior to the habit, it is wajib to wait until the end of that particular prayer time and then perform the ritual bath. Okay, wait to the end of that prayer time and then perform the ghusl, the ritual bath. The ghusl is what's required to take the women out of the state of haid. So they're not out of the state of haid by just the time, it's by performing the ghusl. All acts then become permissible except the intercourse, for which the woman must wait until the habit has passed. Okay, so the difference here being that the prayer then takes place, but she wouldn't have relations until she's completed her normal habit time. Okay, so the signs are all ceased. She can start doing other acts like prayer, but she wouldn't be doing intercourse until her normal habit time has passed. After the habit, if bleeding stops after the habit, the woman can perform the ritual bath and all acts become permissible for her, including intercourse, and the last cycle becomes a new cycle habit. Why? Is because now the habit's changed. The number of days has increased. Okay? And, you know, so long as here, it's between the 3 days and 10 days. So then the habit changes. So it's quite possible for a woman to have differing habits. So her habit changes. So she doesn't always have the same habit in all the time. Marital relations, it's possible for a husband and wife to have marital relations whilst in the state, but there should be no contact, and the area of navel need should be covered. So just take one situation. So a woman bleeds for 2 days and then the bleeding stops. Consequently, she prays and fasts, but then 3 days later the bleeding starts again. This means that she has been menstruating. The prayers she performed do not need to be made up, because why? She was in that state of menstruation, and she is not considered sinful for having performed them. And she is not considered sinful for having performed them. However, the fast that she kept must be made up. From what I understand here is that she wasn't menstruating, so that the first 2 days were not classed as her menstruation period. Therefore, she was praying, and therefore she wasn't sinful for having prayed. Allahu Akbar, 1 second. I need to check this again. Please leave this with me. Situation 2, a woman begins to bleed, and so believing that she is menstruating, she does not perform any prayers, but the bleeding stops on day 2. This is considered irregular bleeding, and so the prayers must be made up. Why? Because the conditions weren't fulfilled for the minimum of the minimum period, which is 3 days. So therefore, this was classed as irregular bleeding. So if she missed prayers, these prayers must be made up. Situation 3, a woman with a 7-day menstrual habit bleeds for 12 days. Okay, so a normal habit is 7 days, and she bleeds for 12 days. So she performs a ritual bath after 10 days have expired, but as the bleeding exceeds the maximum, it is considered to be irregular. Therefore, prayers for 8 and 9 and 10 must be made. Why? Is because she has to have gone on her menstrual habit. Her menstrual habit is 7, so everything after that is being irregular. Okay, so I think that's quite clear. Now we'll go into postnatal bleeding. So postnatal bleeding, this is entered into after more than half the child has appeared. So this is nifas, so most of the child has appeared from the point of exit. With twins, this is entered into on the appearance of the first child. So it's kind of it's the halfway point. So that's why they're saying for twins, which is the dual labor, it's after the first child. Its maximum is 40 days and nights. Okay, so nifas will be up to the point of when that half of the child has appeared, up to 40 days after. Any bleeding during that time will not be considered menstruation until 40 days and nights have passed. Stillborn or miscarriage. In the event of a stillborn or miscarriage, postnatal bleeding rules apply if the limbs are partially formed. Okay, so if you've got a partial limbs, it's the same ruling as a postnatal bleeding. However, it is considered menstruation if there are no formed limbs and a complete purity period preceding it, and the bleeding is over the minimum. Okay, so there's 2 rules here in regards to the stillborn or miscarriage. It's about the formation of the limbs. If the limbs have been formed, then it goes into the category of nifas, and if it's not, then we take the category of haid. And pregnancy, any bleeding of a pregnant woman from the point of confirmation until birth is always irregular bleeding. Okay, so she wouldn't be having menstruation from the point of her pregnancy onwards. The prohibitions apply when she enters postnatal bleeding. Okay, so she's actually liable for prayers and fasting. And fasting is different, because if she feels that it's going to harm the baby, then she's excused. But she has the obligation of prayers upon her. So she's only excused from the point of nifas, which is after the delivery of the baby, until 40 days and nights after. This means that she's required to pray even during labor. And as difficult as this may sound, she's still able to, she still should be praying if she can make it. If she will have to make up the prayer she missed after the postnatal bleeding has stopped, if she did miss any prayers during the labor period. However, in the very last stages of pregnancy, she may experience a constant leakage of liquid and may be considered like as ma'hadura, which is from the excuse category. We'll cover this in more detail as we go forward in terms of the, what excuse means. If we stop there, and then inshallah next week we will go on to the legal excused. If not, inshallah we stop here and then we continue in tomorrow's session, inshallah. اللهم إنا نسألك رضاك والجنة ونعوذ بك من سخطك والنار. اللهم نسألك زيادة في الدين وبركة في الأمر وسعة في الجسد وسعة في الرزق وتوبة قبل الموت وشهادة عند الموت ومغفرة بعد الموت وعفو من الحساب وأمان من العذاب ونصيب من الجنة ورزقنا نظر وجهك الكريم. الفاتحة لها النبي. الحمد لله صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون سلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. There's a question here. If you have a full bath, do you need to still do wudu? So if this is about the question, if this is about what was covered earlier, that if you fall into water, then you would have wudu. That's correct. So if you have a bath, then you've got wudu, and if you've done ghusl, according to the validity of that ghusl, you've got wudu as well. So it's fine, because you've covered water on all parts of your body, so you have wudu. Correct. Shukran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.